All right, mic works. Hey, all right. Welcome to our Windows and Azure Centric data management session. My name is Randy Domino from CommVault, and I'm the Chief Technologist for our Windows products, also on our Microsoft partnership All Up. So we'd like to have an interactive session today where we cover how to quickly work with Azure, either from a tiered store perspective or actually managing the data in Azure and assisting you in getting data to Azure. We got three parts of the session today. We're very lucky to have Larry Levy from Microsoft, who's the Director of Global Alliances, who will give a frame to how Microsoft sees Azure and why CommVault and Microsoft are working so closely together around Azure. I'll come back up, do a few slides, and then I tend to like to do a lot of live demonstrations. So we'll see how Windows and Azure Centric data management, how it touches Exchange, SharePoint, Active Directory, even show CommVault running in Azure. And then Chris Van Wagner, our Chief Strategy Officer, will come up and kind of tie everything together about from a return on investment perspective and where we see the industry going. First question I'd like to ask, how many existing CommVault customers are in the room? So about half. Okay, good. Good. All right, so we'll be able to frame a lot of the features that are in SP10 coming out, and we have a very unique one to speak about as it pertains to Azure and deduplication and micropruning, and a much even more efficient way of storing data in Azure, which is very unique to Azure. So with that, a little background on myself. I'm the old guy. Been at CommVault for over 20 years. Microsoft guy and also the hockey guy, and a couple of you guys know from the hockey perspective on what we do there. So, but the key there is that I do enjoy interactive sessions, as do Larry and as do Chris. So if you have a question, let's not necessarily wait till the end of the session unless we're running down on time. If you have a question along the way, especially with some of the demonstrations, please ask. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Larry Levy from Microsoft, Director of Global Alliances, to give a little bit of a business and technical perspective background on Azure and how and why CommVault's strategically working with it. So Larry, here you go.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.
Hey, it's a CommVault mouse. How about that? So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ignite. You've probably heard that about 100 times by now, but we appreciate you being here, appreciate your time. So what I'd like to do, as Randy said, is just set a little bit of a frame for Microsoft's perspective on some things that are going on in the industry in general, and again, as Randy said, the frame for what our relationship is with CommVault and how this really provides greater value for you as customers of both companies. So this picture of the perfect storm is really a setup for things that are going on around the world. Gartner has made pronouncements over the past couple of years about some industry trends that are at play that we think are very, very central to why some things that are transformational in the industry, both for you and for us, are probably going on. And they really fall in four categories. And any one of these would be significant in its own right, but they've all come together at near the same time to create, as I said, a very transformational opportunity. And that perfect storm really is formed by four changes. The proliferation of devices, whether they be in fixed places as sensors and sensor data for Internet of Things, or mobility, the things we're all carrying around. I think the statistic now is by 2020 there will be more devices on the planet than people, and that will only continue. And with the device proliferation, there's data proliferation. So we hear that about data. There's a lot of talk about that. We'll spend a little bit of time. So we've got mobility and devices. We've got big data. We've got social, and all the things that are going on with social that also bring together not only proliferation of data, but a change in the way people work and the way they interact with each other. So you've got big data, you've got social, you've got mobility, you've got all these things coming together. And these are very transformational things, as I said, in and of themselves. But when they come together, they blow up a lot of preconceived notions of how technology can play and what business opportunities look like. And that's really where Microsoft comes in. We think we're in a position with our partners like CommVault to help you navigate through that transition and to do that in a way that while it will be disruptive, because there's no choice in that matter, there will be disruption, it is something you can navigate effectively, and you can come out the other end stronger, smarter, and in a better position to capitalize on those opportunities, be they internal or external. So this last transformational aspect that really brings in the unifying principle with the devices, the data, and the social is the cloud. Right? So, today the cloud can still mean many things to many people, but I think it's becoming much more clear what the cloud means in terms of opportunity. Right? The cloud is a way for most people, from a young child in an emerging market to the most mature industry leader in a technology business or in a consumer business, to capitalize on scale and capacity. We all have super computational power at our fingertips for pennies. Think about the opportunity that would create for every human being on the planet to have access to that kind of capacity. Now, obviously, we have emerging countries and we have third world countries that don't have access to that, but about 4 billion people today have legitimate access to computational power they couldn't even have imagined 5 years ago, let alone what they can actually harness. So it's a big deal. It really is a big deal. And I'll talk a little bit about our investments in cloud, but you've probably heard quite a bit that during the conference. We talk about the proliferation of devices. This is a build slide, so I'll just come through it. But by 2020, they're talking about 50 billion sensor devices, real devices, useful devices in the world. We're probably going to be about 7.5 billion people by then, so a factor of 7. What does that mean to us? Well, we don't really understand it yet. What power that's going to have, what kind of insight we can derive from the data, because data is just data. But the insights we can derive, both to improve the human condition, especially in impoverished places, medical health benefits. IBM Watson, they announced last week, they're doing this cancer research with a number of medical facilities. And they're able now to genealogically track and genetically track where your predisposition is once you've been identified that you have cancer, to treat it explicitly for how it's operating in your body. And they're being able to computationally do this in a day or two. That's amazing, amazing progress in how we treat what is obviously a scourge to humanity. So we've got devices. And there's a couple of slides here that I'll just talk very, very quickly. At Lufthansa, they've made significant investments in infotainment, right? There's a word that you see oftentimes in vehicles as well as in air transportation. And these transformational opportunities are ways for them to provide unique, distinct, and personalized services for every passenger on the plane. So they will hand you, if you're in first class or in business class, they will hand you a device. That's your personal device. And it is optimized for you and what you want, what they think you want. Of course, you can go play and roam outside of that. But the insights they're gaining about their passengers, about your past history, about what you've watched, what you've done, whether you want to work, whether you want to sleep, that's the experience they want to optimize for you. And so in every aspect, we're seeing the devices in the cloud come into play. Now, this is a story that gets told a lot. Everybody loves the story of the cow, right? So what do we really mean by this? Why is this picture so relevant? Well, there's really two things that really go behind this. One is production. So farmers want milk and meat out of cows. That's what they want. So the health and well-being of the cow is extremely important. So cows now don't just have bells, they have sensors. And the sensors are there to give all-time, real-time feedback about the health and well-being of that animal, so that they optimize the production of milk out of that cow. The second thing that they want to do is they want to manage reproductivity, because that's what they're also having cows for, is they want to make more cows. Well, a healthy cow that is in estrus, that is, they are ready to reproduce, has a 60% greater likelihood of actually producing healthy offspring. So they want to know healthy and when optimized for reproductive capacity. So it's not just because they're interested in where is the cow, what pasture is the cow in, is that pasture the kind of feed I want the cow eating, et cetera, et cetera. That's interesting. That does help them manage, but the ultimate thing they're looking for is production. Right? So it's everywhere. It being devices, big data, and the cloud. It's the confluence of these things that make this interesting. This image from the Apollo launch that went badly, if you will, but eventually all things worked out, is another sort of representation of this. The computational power, the entire crew on the mission and on land, it's less than this. They got to the moon, they got back safely, right? Under extreme conditions, right? That's a big data problem. They solved it with abacuses, slide rules, and sheer will and intelligence. Today, they probably would have been able to solve that problem in minutes. But it still takes human ingenuity to figure out what to go do and how to apply intelligence to the problem. And that's why we need intelligence, not just data. We need insights. Just let you read this for a second, and then I'll move on. So on the data side, we talk about proliferation with the devices, with the sensors, with everything we're doing in social and everything else. This just piles on. Maybe many of your companies have, over the past couple of years, created data warehouses, made big investments in hardware and iron, software, and maybe some technologists. Collect, 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 collect. You've got treasure troves of data that are your data. You've got treasure troves of data that are in the public domain. The question about this, again, turns to insight. How do you manage that? How do you cull through that? What trends and insights can you gain? Because it's not going to get any easier. It's only going to get harder. Oh, and in case you were wondering how big that is, it's a lot. So with that, there's the speed of change. And this is the last talk track that I'll have before I turn it over to Randy. Right? So the America's Cup is an internationally run race. Our friends at Oracle and Larry Ellison specifically have made it a personal stamp of honor, badge of honor, to win this race on behalf of the United States. And as a result of that, he has personally invested hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 10 years doing exactly what you'd expect a technologist to do, using big data and science to create the fastest boats on the planet. And this is an interesting thing because you see over in the lower corner of the screen, it says 1851, 12 kilometers per hour. That was the maximum speed of a boat in the first America's Cup race that was run back then. How long do you think it took for that speed to double? 5 years? 10 years? 15 years? Any guesses? 100 years? That's how long it took. How long do you think it took to double again? This is about big data. This is about insights. This is about how you get boats to go faster than the wind. These are sailboats, folks. These are not motorboats. These are sailboats. The wind is only blowing so fast. The wind doesn't blow really much faster now than it blew in 1851. So what's changed? What's changed is science. These boats no longer touch the water very often. They're flying above the water. Friction is gone. And with that, with the insight that it takes to make technology do this, and do it hopefully in a manner that is safe, because there are dangers when you're operating at 100 kilometers an hour on the water, right, is a real challenge. But this is what you can do when you apply science to a real-world problem. You've probably seen a bunch of slides this week if you've been going to sessions on trending and volumes, whether it's in cloud adoption. We obviously have a position on cloud adoption. You've seen evidence this year of the investments that Microsoft continues to make in building out cloud and infrastructure. We've got 19 regions with data center capacity. And when we say data center capacity, we mean serious data center capacity. Right? Amazon and Google combined have less capacity than we do. And when we talk about capacity, we talk about geo-replicated capacity. So in any region, when we say we have cloud infrastructure, that means we have at least 2 data centers to cover that region. And you automatically get geo-replication and redundancy if you use our cloud. You do not get that automatically with our competitors. And in case you're wondering where those data centers are and what's coming next, this will give you a good view of that. Again, a little bit of stats down in the bottom. So with that, we show this picture. For those of you who are familiar with how the story ended with the last America's Cup race, the United States went down 6 races to 0, 7 wins. And the guys were just pulling their hair out. They were really trying to figure out what they had to do differently. They had been trying lots of different things. Again, all the scientists and data scientists, and there's sensors all over these boats. And they make minute precision corrections while they're on the water in real time to get optimal performance. And they went back and they analyzed the data from all 6 of those races and all the test races they ran with these boats to understand what was going on and why they were underperforming. And they came back and they applied some of that and they won a race. They said, okay, what did we learn from winning? We learned some things from losing. What did we learn from winning? And they iterated and iterated and iterated. And if you know the way this ends, the United States won every race after that and won and retained the cup. But this is about science. This is about hard work. This is about ingenuity. So in one case, they crashed out. But they came back. And while I'm not necessarily a fan of Oracle, you can have a real good story, a real good feeling around what this takes in terms of real capacity and real commitment. I'll leave this slide up as I transition to Randy. Thank you.
So Larry, thank you for setting the stage on data management. All right. And it's those who adapt. And CommVault's been very lucky to have a very, very long-standing partnership with Microsoft about using their platform to enable basic things like backup and recovery, advanced capabilities around backup, recovery, archive, e-discovery, and data management, analytics. What do you do with that data and the massive amounts of data and locations? So how do you adapt and harness the perfect storm? And we'll start to get into what Microsoft and CommVault have done together and how we got to what we're doing today, especially as it showcases Azure and heterogeneous data management. So Windows and Azure Centric data management. All right. The premise basically is we're going to use Windows and or Azure as our platform to enable you to manage all the devices Larry Ellison has, and Oracle, and Linux, and Windows. I'll explain more detail how and why we selected it as our platform. And this includes basic things like Azure as a tier. I was very surprised this week that a lot of customers came up to me and said, do you support Azure as a target? I was like, okay, we have for quite some time, and I'll explain why. How do we use Azure Compute? Can I run some of the CommVault components in Azure? I'm going to O365. How do we provide value add? Azure will be part of a hybrid environment for quite some time. We do all this with one single piece of software, and that is a philosophical difference that CommVault has than every other vendor in the industry. So how did we adapt and how did we evolve? In honor of Star Wars Week and Star Wars Day, we decided to go with this slide to show how the CommVault-Microsoft partnership has adapted and evolved over the past 15 years. And we'll have a trivia question in a little while, explaining some more detail on that will give away an Xbox to the first person who gets the right answer. So pay attention for the next 20 minutes. The answer will actually be given. So let's go back to the CommVault timeline. This is back in time. I was at CommVault, actually ran development at the time. And we have some basic premises. Quickly recover data. Use magnetic disk. Databases and Microsoft stuff is kind of important in the industry. Make sure we manage that accurately. Email, Exchange, SQL. And while we're known for crown jewel capability around our Exchange solution, it actually was the third email solution we supported, beyond Lotus Notes and actually something called Banyan Mail. But we realized this was important. But I call this the dark ages because as I was running development, about a third of my dev staff was dedicated to one thing as we had a Unix platform, a little similar to Symantec Net Backup today. And that was we had to have people dedicated just to port the solution to HPUX, to AIX, to Solaris, et cetera, et cetera. Think about that. A third of very high-end devs just porting the solution around. Didn't make a lot of sense, especially when most of the key business growth was in the Microsoft side and the PC products. So we decided to do something new. Let's create a brand new data management software solution. Get out of the hardware game, software only. Keep those genetic DNA traits that were critical. Quickly recover, search, find, applications, manage. All right? We did that, but we tried to do something very radical. And that is, we decided to use Windows. All right? And the partnership between CommVault and Microsoft, which actually led Microsoft to becoming the largest equity owner of CommVault, side of our employees and our banker at the time, was we will use Windows as our platform to enable data management. This was something new. Everybody else in the industry was with Unix and Linux, and I knew the pain and the challenges that occurred, that caused by how much dev staff I had to have just supporting. Microsoft now gains a partner for a little bit more complex data, and this is an analogy that held true 15 years ago and holds true today. Think about it. 15 years ago, we gave a vision of where CommVault is today on data management. First product we came out with back in 2000 was advanced backup and recovery. Microsoft had a backup product back then. Many of you may remember NT Backup. It was okay, did its job, but a lot of mid-size and high enterprise needed much more robust capability. They needed granularity. They needed support for outside of the Microsoft stack, and that's where CommVault fits, that above and beyond capability that Microsoft will provide in the box. And that's the premise for the partnership 15 years ago, premise for the partnership today, and the premise going forward. This is why we're kind of advanced. We also have a lot of best practices we can pass on to our customers. So here's the foundation. This is, inside of CommVault, sometimes we call this the money slide, but it really showcases the difference in philosophy that CommVault has with a number of other leading vendors out there. I spoke to one customer, one prospect, yesterday as a matter of fact, and they had 12 different products to do data management. Large retail store, very famous. But 12 different products, 12 different IT teams, 12 different sets of storage products to use. And our philosophy very, very different. While we have best of breed around backup, archive, e-discovery, chargeback, we had a very different philosophy than everyone else. And that is our base platform and the foundation of the partnership is we use Windows Server and Windows Azure as our platform. And that enables us to put CommVault on top of it as a single software solution with best-of-breed capabilities when in comparison to all those other products. That's the rate of why we're growing the way we are. I'd love to, hey, I'm the geek here. I'd love to go down and say, let's do our exchange, compare and contrast against anybody out there. Let's talk about managing SharePoint. But the real benefit to CommVault is a single software solution with best-of-breed capability around those key points those IT managers need to have. And this is a big, big philosophical difference from CommVault compared to the rest of the industry. And we thank Microsoft for enabling that to happen with originally Windows 2000, now Windows Server 12 and Azure, and we're looking forward to Windows Server 16 to actually let us do even more. So that 15 years of optimization and working on Windows Server, Larry, that didn't hurt when we go to Windows Azure, because we got to take all that stuff and go forward very, very quickly. So a little history before we get into the technology. All right? My definition of backup and recovery, and I'll do a little demonstration shortly. Take that email from Exchange 03, 10 years ago, restored into Exchange 13 or 0365, and do it very quickly. How many people here have VMware? Don't be mad. Microsoft won't yell at you. They know it's out there. All right? Keep your hands up. How many people have Hyper-V? All right. We're seeing a sea change in the industry, and that is especially when the VMware annual maintenance pricing comes up. Yeah, a little snicker. I thought I'd get a little bit of attention. Because where's Larry? Where's it? How much does Hyper-V cost? I think it's free with Windows Server. A lot of our mid-sized and large customers are migrating to that, so we wanted to help them. So my definition of backup and recovery is take the VMware backup at the file, volume, and VMDK level, and enable that to be automatically restored to a VHD and do the conversion to Hyper-V on the fly, still enabling you to stay within your 3, 5, 7, 21-year retention period because we have all that old backup, and we have it indexable. Matter of fact, some of the new features for the existing CommVault folks on V10, we can actually auto-provision those VMs on the fly in Hyper-V on-prem, and we can auto-provision that VM in Azure. So think about a VMware server that may be coming legacy, and that data, auto-provision the VM directly into Azure. Huge benefit. And by the way, it's indexable and searchable. And I'm not going to steal some of the thunder because we have a virtualization session coming up after lunch, so I don't want to take too much there. But again, it's not just backup and recovery at server. It's what can we do with the data when we have it. Archiving. If I spoke to 70 people in this room, I'd get 68 different definitions of archiving. Storage management, e-discovery, et cetera, et cetera. Analytics, what can I do with the data when I have it? The premise that Larry talked about, what did Oracle do with the data as they were analyzing it for the boats and the races? Every IT team has that responsibility today. Replication, managing laptops, et cetera, we can move on. Encryption is a key too, and deduplication, which I'll talk about in a second. Now, I say lead by example, and I've referred to this for the Microsoft folks in the room. I have been instructed with Larry, all right, as I've been told by the corporate vice president of Microsoft, Susan Hauser, make sure I make this point when we talk about CommVault and Microsoft together, all right? I'm the geek, but occasionally when corporate vice presidents talk, I actually listen to them. Not too often, as Chris Powell knows, but I do listen to them. And the lead by example slide is we're providing a lot of best practice capability to our customers and prospects. So for the past 8 years, CommVault has supported Azure. Even before it was called Azure, back when it was called Microsoft Cloud Services. First customer was a shipping company called the Fognac in Alaska who tracked the data the ships were carrying. So 8 years of optimization benefits to our customers today. By the way, we've used CommVault in production for 6 years as part of our tiered storage. If you go to commvault.com, more often than not, that is running in Azure. Again, these benefits go to our customers. We turn that around a little bit. How many folks here use Office or Outlook or Exchange or SharePoint? A few of you. Past 15 years, perfect data management and protection. And if there was an issue, the public would have known about it. Perfect backup recovery, data management at a little tiny place called the Office Products Group at Microsoft, where they make Exchange, where they make SharePoint. This type of high-end stress type of data, these benefits we pass on to our customers, both when CommVault and Microsoft are working together. That covers just about every major Microsoft server technology, with the exception of one. We covered Exchange, we covered SharePoint. What one's uniquely not covered here? SQL. Good point. This one I have a 22 and a 21-year-old in college. I also have a 17-year-old in high school about to go to college. And I get to terrorize them. And I say, be careful what you put in Xbox and Xbox Live, because Daddy's backing it up, and I will find out what you put in there. Now, it's a little social media scaring to them, because I say, hey, we all try to teach our kids, be careful what you put on the internet. But probably the largest MSP on the planet, if you consider each Xbox user a business or a consumer, all of that massive amount of data protected by CommVault. And most recently, because of the experience there, and a couple of years ago, Microsoft GFS, which basically means Microsoft Internal. So we're coming up with best practice techniques together with Microsoft that get passed on to the benefits to our customers and our users. Quickly on Exchange, since it's key points. I say O365 as another remote Exchange server. All right. How many folks here have some e-discovery or compliance requirements in their organization? Do you have an O365 or Exchange e-discovery requirement, or do you have an enterprise-wide one? Everybody says it's enterprise-wide. So we want to enable that O365 search set to be part of the enterprise. And if you've gone to Exchange 10 or 13, you've seen those databases grow pretty quickly. And that's because of how the storage mechanism. Lots of multimedia capability in there, but single instance storage went away. So deduplication and smart storage for those long-term copies, rely on CommVault. Probably the fastest growing application and the fastest growing use of disk space on-prem right now is SharePoint. And managing Exchange does give you a lot of benefit to managing SharePoint. So we want to enable that server, database, site, sub-site level management to be very simple, and I'll show you some of the techniques we have around SharePoint. And right now I get comfortable because we get into some of the demonstrations. And again, if you have questions now, let's make this interactive. So here's my mailbox, all right? And I'm one of the IT guys' worst nightmare. I've been at CommVault 21 years, and I got about a 55 gig mailbox. Yeah, some of you guys talked about it. And that's for two reasons. Reason number one is I want to stress our system as we test it ourselves. Reason number two, I'm like everybody else. I'm a spoiled brat. I like showing off some of the history of CommVault. People want to see stuff from the late 90s. So I tend to save everything. Let's go to the end of my mailbox. And here's an email from a lady named Cami Granato. And for those of you who may follow hockey, she's probably the most famous women's hockey player on the planet. I'm going to take that email from May of 2004 when I backed it up on Exchange 2003, and I'm going to tombstone it. Technical term for me means it's really being deleted from the database. So how do I get that back? I'm running Exchange 13 now. One of the biggest challenges folks have, how do I get something back that's gone after I've upgraded to new technology? So we'll take a look at what I consider the CommVault old-fashioned way first, and then we'll get into some of the more modern ways. But I would say the administrative way people do it. This is for the administrators who want to be able to recover individual emails as well as protect their whole Exchange server or enable their O365 users to more microscopically manage their data. Here's the CommVault interface, browser-based. I can run it from home, run it from the hotel room, I can run it from the office. I can manage every server, every application, every laptop, every device from a single location with a single piece of software. In this case, I want to manage Exchange at a very granular level. I want to browse and restore. When do I want to see the data as of? A week ago, month ago, year ago? I'm just going to take a look at all of it. Now, as the administrator, I have access to the mailboxes. Every mailbox, every folder. And you also see contacts, calendar items, conversations, which are e-discoverable requirements based on a lot of the compliance rules and regulations today. Did somebody know about a meeting? Did somebody know about a conversation? How do I search that? How many people use Link and use IMs today? That's an e-discoverable piece of information, too. We set that information to go directly to Exchange mailboxes or NTFS file. Search that, too. But I'll say basic. I'll go into my inbox, and I'll do a basic sort for now, and I'll just sort reverse chronological. All right? And there's a message from Cami, May of 2004. I'll tag it, make the restore request. I can put it to the same mailbox or a different one. It could be an HR discovery, legal hold. I'm just going to put it right back where it came from. So you see here the job is kicked off. So what I've done, I've asked CommVault to go out and find a message in Randy's mailbox. Backed up on Exchange 03. It happened to have been tiered off to Azure. So this piece of data is living in the cloud. I'm going through my little MiFi device over here. Find that one piece of data from Exchange 03 and restore it directly into my mailbox on Exchange 13. I could restore it directly into O365. A lot of customers are migrating to O365. How do you get something back from before? What do I stay in my 3 and 7 years? And while I've been talking, here's the message restored exactly as it was. That's my definition of backup and recovery. Release independent, granular, searchable, easy, quick, and in a very savvy way, we use Azure as a tier. Any questions on the Exchange piece? All right. Now, typical CommVault customer, IT team, they see that. Thank you very much. We made him a hero. About a year later, they say, come here, I want to talk to you. You've made me a little too popular. Yeah, you can imagine, right? I never got asked to do Exchange granular management before. A year later, I'll be doing 200 a month. Stop, please, help. What do we do? So years ago, we sat down with our customers and said, it'd be pretty cool if the user could recover their own email, wouldn't it? Why does the IT team have to get involved if they want to give permission? Back before the term self-service IT became common. So we created a virtual repository, which we may or may not have smartly called Content Store, and said, hey, let's give all the Exchange users access to all the email that was deleted, archived here. So go back to the same mailbox, and you see here at the top of my mailbox, I have an email from Jason Bowers called Skill Card. All right, that'll come into play in a second. All the messages, all the folders here are my online Exchange or my on-prem Exchange. It doesn't matter. Again, straight out of Outlook. I go into Content Store, and I see all of the messages I've ever had available to me. They're an e-discoverable protected copy. I cannot change them. I cannot edit them. I can open up the message. I can reply to it again. I can forward it. It's nice to have it, but I can't change it. One thing I can even do is I can even take this email, all right, say I want to bring it in to my current live mailbox or copy or a user-led message level recovery, click copy, go back to the current mailbox, and now I have 2 copies of that message. So we want to offload and give the users access to their own email at a very application-sensitive way. So 2 ways to do it. Administrative capability like I showed you first, self-service IT mode second. Make it very simple for folks to have access. So we're going to start to do a little walk, crawl, walk, evolve as the CommVault features tend to play. So before I proceed, any questions on the Exchange piece and or 365 piece? We'll go over to SharePoint. Wouldn't it be nice to manage SharePoint the same way I manage Exchange? Or the same way I manage SQL? Or the same way I manage Oracle, Unix, Linux, NetWare? So here's SharePoint. I'm going to take this one file, get Larry very nervous, and I'm going to delete this Azure v4 document. Send it to the recycle bin. And I'll go to the recycle bin. Since I'm from New York and nobody trusts me, I'll get it out of here as well. So it's been removed from SharePoint. Azure v4. Now, the users can do it themselves, or let's go back to the administrative way. I'm going to click on SharePoint. Now, the database level and the doc level, by the way, existing CommVault customers go to 10.0 v6 because there's significant enhancements in there from a performance perspective. Also, when we went to 10, we heard from the customers loud and clear. It took 7 or 8 mouse clicks to recover a site or a subsite or a farm. You can now quickly go into the database part, do farms, and do it down to 1 or 2 clicks. We heard, we listened, we reacted and evolved with version 10 as pertains to SharePoint. So here are the docs. Quick browse and restore. Same exact interface. I don't have to learn something new because I'm now managing SharePoint. All the docs are here. Scroll down, I got a couple of sites loaded. Go to the Microsoft document area. Oh, there's the Azure v4. Major, minor, searchable. Make the restore request. Do I want it to go to the same SharePoint location or a different one? A lot of customers want to move sites and subsites around. This is a very convenient way to do it. We don't sell it as a SharePoint site migration tool. All right, it's data management. Simply a part of overall data management. So I'll make the restore request. This time I'll stay here and watch the job kick off. So same principle as I did with Exchange. Item I had backed up in SharePoint from SharePoint 10, find a little tiny one, go up to Azure with our indexing, find it, restore it directly into SharePoint 13. Premise here of managing SharePoint, same way you manage Exchange. In addition to giving site, subsite, farm level, and full disaster recovery of my SharePoint environment. And again, we're doing this one single product, whether it's in a VM, whether it's not in a VM. Application, microscopic management of my data. There's the item, came back from Azure. I'll come back to SharePoint. I have to refresh the screen. There's Azure v4 exactly as it was. So I'm managing Exchange, I'm managing SharePoint. Deduplication, encryption. By the way, we make Azure a compliant-ready target now because the use of our encryption keys, we keep the encryption keys by default on-prem. So if you're under compliance guidelines, CommVault's use of Azure, and we work with Microsoft on this very tightly, we keep the encryption keys on-prem with our key management capability. Azure is a compliant-ready target right now. We talked about Exchange, we talked about SharePoint. SQL's not as sexy to demo. We can do drop file, group level, et cetera. But what's at the heart of every Windows Server environment? AD. Now, I am one of the few, I am not proud to say I know LDAP. But if you want to manage AD at a granular level, who here knows LDAP? No offense, it's like high school learning Greek. It's not, is it hard, is it easy? It's hard stuff. All right, so we want to find a way to make it easier to manage Active Directory. So I'm going to go live here. Go Active Directory users and computers. I'm going to bring up my ID. Now, Chris Powell's in the audience, new Chief Marketing Officer for CommVault. We have a marketing team. Proud to be here from a marketing side. Chris, stand up for a second. Not kidding. Stand up. All right. You saw new logos. People actually came by our booth this week and actually knew what we did. So branding, new messaging, making it easier for folks to actually understand what we're doing. We thank Chris for that. But Chris, I'm going to give myself a promotion right now. Hope you don't mind. All right. I am now, I've always wanted to do this, and I never have. Seriously. I am now the CommVault Zamboni driver. Always wanted to drive one. I play hockey. We got a hockey team, but I've never been able to drive the Zamboni. I've changed an attribute in Active Directory. All right. Now, LDAP, hard stuff. A lot of third-party applications extend and tweak the schema. How do we manage that data, especially around SharePoint? Let's get back to the CommVault interface. All right, we'll close down SharePoint. Active Directory. I want to browse. And here's the keys now. Same exact interface. I'm using a single solution to manage the entire enterprise. Let me browse. Every object, every attribute on the server becomes available to me to manage. Go into Users. I'll scroll down. I can recover the entire object with SID or security ID information, or this is the more tricky one, just a single attribute. Make the restore request. Where do you think this attribute, this piece of data is being stored right now that I'm pulling it back from? Azure. All right, we're using it as a tier. You can go disk to Azure. A lot of our customers with 10, 15, 20,000 plus laptops will back up directly to Azure. No need to send that data on-prem, move it off to Azure. But I have a single interface and a single access to manage that data no matter where it's stored. So I've made the Active Directory request. It's completed. We'll come back to AD. I will refresh the screen. And unfortunately, I have my old title back. I'd rather be the Zamboni driver, but we're managed AD at a very granular level. We've probably done 3 quick demonstrations on here. If you don't have CommVault, they're going to take, Norm, days with other products? Yeah. So, difference. Again, our philosophy and how we do it, and we're doing it with a single product. Now let's start to get a little bit more fun. All right? E-discovery and search are keys. When we back up, when we archive that data, we give the customer the option of indexing the data based on content. Personally, I think this is very important as it pertains to SharePoint. Because with SharePoint today, folks don't know the names of the files they're working on. You're lucky if you remember if it was an Excel spreadsheet, if it was a PowerPoint, if it was a PDF, but they don't know what they're working on. They just know it by content. So let me log in to our e-discovery capability, which is the same product as the backup and recovery. Very Bing-like interface here. And I'm simply going to search for the word Azure. But when I hit return, and I'll try to do it loud to see when the search starts, I'm going to do an enterprise-wide search, Exchange, SharePoint, Unix, Windows, Linux, file data, for the word Azure in the enterprise, whether it was online, nearline, archive, or deleted. So I'll type in Azure, hit return, 1001, 1002, bang. Every item that had the word Azure is now available to me to do what I need to do with it. Now, I can even set it up for an end user to be able to search their own data that they own. I'll go to that one of the Azure docs here, and we give an HTML preview of the file for the end user. They can bring it back. We'll actually highlight where the matches are. Hundreds of different attachment types, PDFs, Office files, heterogeneous data. So it's being able to find this data and search for it, in addition to backing up and recovering it, that makes the difference. Here's the Azure. Remember the SharePoint item I had before? Azure v4? Well, here's the search result with the HTML rendered preview. Right. So everything I can search, even if Azure was part of an Excel spreadsheet attachment in my message or somebody else's message, I'll get the substring search. Question? OCR? Okay. Well, we will not provide the OCR, but we have ways of indexing with that capability. We have APIs that can enable that search set to be put into CommVault. We actually can take the OCR results and put that into our indexing system as well. For an OCR scenario, that's when I'd say, hey, we have a lot of good guys around the world, professional services folks, SEs, who are optimized and a lot of experience with that requirement. I'd say, hey, let's sit down, let's have the discussion about exactly what you want to do. Because your OCR requirement is probably going to be a little different than a lot of other folks. So I don't have a general standard answer, but yes, we can work with the OCR options.
So are you guys backing up your Exchange data into Azure, or is this just more of an archive?
Okay, philosophical difference again. And I'm not avoiding the question. I don't believe in a backup copy and an archive copy and an e-discovery copy. That's for the other guys who want to acquire different piece parts, all right? We move the data, hopefully one time. We'll set policies against that data when and where it may have to be moved between tiers. So it's one set of the data. The key is that when we, quote-unquote, back it up or when we archive, we create that index to make it very easy and very easy to search. All right. Another differentiator would be deduplication. And you want to be able to store as little bit of data in the secondary and tertiary target. All right. And I'll give one example on deduplication differentiation between us and EMC. EMC wanted to provide deduplication because they wanted to keep those, those symmetric boxes and other piece of hardware optimized. So they went out and acquired data domain. I don't think I'm stretching matters too far. It's about a $150,000 Linux-based piece of iron that enables deduplication. So here's the philosophical difference. Separate product has to be managed, separate piece of hardware. Or CommVault, which will dedupe in flight. All right? Client-based dedupe. And we'll use a simple Windows server as our target, as a deduplication target. Now, apology, Larry, not that there's anything simple about a Windows server, but it's 1/20th the cost of a Linux-based piece of iron is data domain, but I get to manage everything in flight with a single solution. So much less expensive, much more optimal from a Windows Server perspective. And remember, we got 16 years of optimization in Windows targets. Use the Windows Server as a dedupe. Or use Azure as a deduplication target. All right? And speaking of Azure, who are the CommVault customers here using us with Azure right now? A few of you. Okay. Now, I'm only allowed to talk about features and functionality that are delivered this quarter. All right? I like the old days when we were private because I could say we're doing 1 and 2 or 3 years out. But we have rules and regulations now, and Chris is sitting here, and I'm going to get in trouble. So I can't talk about beyond July 1. But one thing we are delivering in V10 SP11, which will be here by the end of June, is unique to Azure deduplication that eliminates or optimizes the micro-pruning feature that every other cloud target has. So you'll be able to dedupe to Azure as efficiently as you're able to dedupe to a hard drive in your office. And that is another explicit case example. Where's David No? Not here. David No, not here. A key example of our key engineering folks like David No sitting down with Microsoft and saying, hey, we want to optimize this environment. And unique to Azure, our deduplication capability, which a lot of our existing customers know how kind of way cool that is, very, very enhanced feature around Azure. And that will be here next month. So, yeah, client level, client or source level, or target level. Dedupe before you send. Generally, the default is dedupe before you send it. But there are some federal locations that people don't know about that you can't touch that data in any way, shape, or form until it gets deduped. But generally, it's dedupe before. We kind of refer to it as client side. Questions? All right. Let me go back to the history of the partnership a little bit. All right, we've kind of taken the covers off some of the secrecy between the CommVault Microsoft partnership here, right? And when you're managing data at places like Office and Xbox and now GFS, there are reasons why over the 15 years we have had GA support on day one for every Windows Server solution product, every Exchange, every SharePoint product, every version of SQL. The enhanced capabilities around Azure is because of the level of integration that we're working with Microsoft. Maybe we didn't do a good job as we should have just explaining that over the years, but Azure's kind of waking us both up to saying, hey, there's reasons why we've optimized this and passed it on. The benefits on to our customers, both from an Azure use perspective and a CommVault. The three major keys that Microsoft has around Azure: ExpressRoute, which is that high-speed link. We supported it on day one when it came out. Import-export, when you can take SAN drives out of your local place, ship them to an Azure data center. They can become part of the CommVault Media Agent in Azure. Hint, hint, that's my next demo. That's supported. All right, so geo-replication also, where they'll make 3 copies to 3 different data centers. If the primary data center goes away, we will automatically go to the secondary one, bring the data back from it. It's almost like, wow, it almost seems like it's an aux copy working with Azure. Yeah, all right, that's the communication we had as the dev groups. Say, hey, what can we do that pass on these benefits to how people really want to manage their data?
So I got one last question on that.
Good.
Duplicate into Azure, do I need a virtual machine running in Azure?
No.
So
No.
I can use it as a solution. Correct.
And it might be accessible from any number of VE agents
Around the world.
in Azure at the same time.
Yep.
Backwards calls on it.
Yeah, and speak.
Back from one, restore to from another. That seems right. It's all there. You share the same storage account and container with any number of
Is that going to be seen as a global deduplication store then?
it doesn't have to be. It's just
Yeah.
so global duplication store refers to like storage policies and how the scope of how we do. This is just a cloud target, right? So it's like a library, which can be shared by any agent.
Right. And speaking of the global dedupe, since David's kind of hijacked the session, which I love when he does, because he said he was going to sit here and do nothing today, so we had to make that change. But no, and David and I have worked together for about, 16 years? So he could have done this just as well as I could have, we could have straight replaced it. But on the global dedupe, let's say I have davidno.ppt, 82 times in SharePoint, 52 times in Exchange, and 722 times on file shares. Everybody familiar with Windows Server deduplication, where a file level I will dedupe in that one box? Compliments to Microsoft, great storage savings. Dedupe. Ours is global. So if it's all those copies of davidno.ppt, guess how many times we're going to store it in that target? Once. So other vendors will talk about deduplication. Data Domain will talk about it. CommVault, global dedupe. I wish I had, 15, 16 years ago, I was lucky enough to get on the patent for the message of recovery. I wish I could still say, hey, it's message of recovery, and people come talk about CommVault. It's a more complicated world, like Larry Levy said. It's a lot more data, a lot more things. So we require 10, 15, 30-minute discussions. So here are the features, here are the differences we're passing on. So different world. Now, speaking of VMs and running in Azure, and now I'm really reliant on it. I'm connected to a VPN. I'm going to go into remote desktop connection. Connect to a site. Log in. I am connecting to an Azure data center on the east coast of the United States. Click. For those existing CommVault customers, that's obviously the CommVault Start icon. A little password security here, so I'm going to change it. Log in. And I will. A lot of the existing CommVault customers are seeing this for the first time. Doesn't this look familiar? This is CommVault and the media agents. Guess where this is running out of? Azure Data Center. All right. I got about 30 or so VMs that I'm managing here. And by the way, Microsoft announced that Exchange now supports it in a VM, so that's something else we can help here with. Including, Larry, hide your eyes, but Microsoft has, had supported for quite some time Linux as a VM in Azure. And most customers who have Exchange and SharePoint have some heterogeneity in their environment. Well, here's how I can manage Linux just as easy as I'm managing Windows, Exchange, SharePoint, SQL. And for those who are familiar with Unix, you're familiar with that file tree. Including, here's a machine called Lightning. I'll just do a quick browse. When do I want to see the data? Again, I didn't have to learn anything new because now this data is living in Azure. All right? Lightning is a machine being managed from Azure that is actually on-prem. So we're reversing it. Now, this is where you want to sit down with CommVault and Microsoft experts. What's the most optimal way of using Azure? Do I want some of the compute on-prem? Do I want some of it in Azure? Take advantage of the experiences we have. All right? Now, a couple of key points. A lot of folks have more data sets in Azure now. That data also has to be indexed and available for e-discovery. And wouldn't it be nice if I could take that index set and instantly manage it and merge it with my on-prem environment? Taking O365 and managing that data set on-prem and with other data sets in Azure. That's where CommVault does. That search I did before included the data sets we have access to in Azure. All right. So managing the different environments, managing, including the ability to take those Linux devices and that Linux data and restore that to Windows. So we can take the Unix, the Linux, the NetWare, and Mac data that we manage, restore that to Windows as well. Now that's, to me, an extended definition of backup and recovery. Not just as file servers, not just the data itself. All right. So we've seen CommVault on-prem push-pull. We've seen CommVault running in Azure. I'm going to close down from Azure. And for the existing CommVault customers, we'll throw one out for Larry. CommVault customers, raise your hand. Keep your hands up if you're under capacity licensing now. Most of you. If you want to begin using Azure, you don't have to talk to your CommVault sales rep. All you have to do is go to Storage, Library and Drive Configuration, click on the comm server you're working on, and here's you guys have seen the control panel. I want to add a cloud storage library, and I'll call it Azure for Ignite. It's a new device. Scroll down to Azure, and as soon as Larry Levy gives you your Azure credentials, you can immediately begin using Azure as a tiered target with CommVault. That's why a lot of our reps are working very closely with the Microsoft ones, because it is that easy to add Azure as part of a CommVault solution. And speaking of cloud vendors, one suggestion I have before I pass it on to Chris Van Wagener. Think very hard about what cloud target you're going to use. Because David Noah and I got a call about a year ago from a partner of ours. Said, hey, you got 5 dozen or so customers in our cloud. We just want to give you a heads up. In 2 weeks, we're shutting off the power and turning off the lights. Anybody remember Nirvanix? All right. So when you to get your cloud vendor, make sure they're going to be around 3, 4, 5 years from now. So David and I worked very closely with Microsoft and got those customers migrated into Azure very quickly. So if you have some Amazon and you have some Azure, CommVault can manage all of that data from an Azure data center or on-prem, or manage data, create a single index across all different cloud types. Single piece of software. 15 years ago, we say we're hardware agnostic, we're application agnostic. Now we say we're also cloud agnostic. But we're going to use Windows Server, we're going to use Windows Azure as our platform to enable all the magic some of the magic that I've showed you today. I've only shown about 5% of the features, right? Kind of the ones that get attention because we all use Outlook, we all use SharePoint, so I kind of stayed there. Questions for me before I hand it off to our Chief Strategy Officer, Chris Van Wagener. And I'll bring all three of us up for Q&A at the end as well. So Chris, there we go.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Randy. I'm going to move kind of quickly because Randy did a great job and took up some time in going through it. But I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. Number one, as we've seen, data is scattered over a whole host of locations. And one of the things that you need to be aware of, and I was traveling in Europe most recently and Larry talked about it, is data sovereignty. And as you explore the cloud, where is your data being stored? Because it really is an important topic that you need to understand. Is my data local? And how many of you are working for companies that have international offices? One. Okay. Do you know the data sovereignty rules in Europe require you to keep data that was created in Luxembourg, or Norway in Norway, or Germany in Germany? And so when you choose a cloud provider, understand that they have the resources in country to be able to store your data and keep your data in that country, so you're not running afoul of data sovereignty issues. And Microsoft has been really unique in that ability, and I think Larry showed that, where they have the data center resources in those countries to enable you to exploit cloud and not violate data sovereignty issues. The other piece about scattered across many locations is, I will bet you, because I talk to many CEOs and CIOs, that your CEO, your Chief Executive Officer, already thinks you're in the cloud. If you ask your CEO, he already thinks you've done it. You're there already. I had a discussion with the CIO, And he told me we're right on our way. So the interesting part is you as the guys are really being driven by the upper levels who actually think you're already there. A couple of statistics. For the first time in the history, more VMs were created in the cloud last year than were created on-premise. Some 20+ million according to Gartner. And why is that important? Because only 40% of your data is actually production workloads. 60% of it is secondary workloads. And why do I bring this up? Because if you think about it, and what Randy showed you, is as your production workloads migrate, the big issue as IT professionals you're going to be dealing with is how do you keep my secondary copies close to my production workloads? Because you're not going to want to restore over wide area networks. And as your production workloads move from on-premise into a hybrid agreement, across platforms, across formats, how do I keep all of those secondary copies, which actually keep my business running along with those primary copies, close to the production workload? And that's where CommVault can help. The other thing is a proliferation of workloads for secondary copies, whether it's DR automation, which quite honestly I think is an overlooked use case for why I should use cloud capabilities. Using cloud as a DR target costs approximately 1/6 of what it costs to do a traditional data center to data center DR strategy. Think of that. A cloud DR strategy costs you 1/6 what a traditional data center to data center DR strategy will cost you. And so as you look at this, we try and simplify the number of needs. So whether it's how do I collect data that's now strewn all over the internet, whether it's in country, out of country, how do I protect it? Randy said, how do I secure it so that only people who have access to it can get access to it? How do I keep it? So one of the very common questions I get is, hey, I'm moving to O365, but I need to keep my email for 7 years or 12 years or 14 years. How do I do that and use O365? That's where CommVault can help. So what's the impact of all of this? What was really simple in your life has become much more complicated to manage. Very quickly, you need to think about your data now as a strategic asset and not as a challenge to manage, but think about how your organization treats financial information or how they, most recently I went to a company called Archer Daniel Midlands. They're one of the world's largest processors of corn. And when I tell you out in Illinois, there is a plant that is literally the size of 14 football fields laid end to end. And all it does is process corn. But the point is that while they kept an eye on that asset and it was really important, what they were learning was the big data and information coming out of that plant were just as important to the plant. So the data today is an important asset that you need to manage just like your company manages its other important assets. So as Randy said, we were founded on a very revolutionary premise that data had value. Not the infrastructure, not the storage, but the data had the value. And so we tried to solve a bunch of customer issues, like how is it protected, where is it, who owns it, where is it going, as well as many content-related questions and problems about how do I do the things that I need to do as an IT organization to manage my data. And what Randy showed you is a very simple concept, but really hard to do, in fact, which is provide you with a single index map of all your data, no matter where it is. And that's a very unique capability, as well as provide a virtual repository that can go from cloud to on-premise, across geographic boundaries, across functional and IT boundaries. So very quickly, what's our value? It's one, we simplify what has become a very complex world to manage information, and we make it less costly. But more importantly, as IT people, we're not just dealing with cost and operational, but today we have to deal with different things like business risk and ensure compliance. So that's how we help you meet those challenges. So I wanted to leave a couple of minutes for questions, and thank you very much.